you happen to be here across this land or other places in the world. Damon Chief Jones coming to you. Hey guys, thanks for being here. Hope to be doing some auditing pretty soon. Just depends on how things come out with you all on your end. Now, today in studio, I have Roxy. She also goes by the handle or the moniker Gas Mask Roxy. And what her and her group have found out, there's a thing calling on feeling cute. And I think, law enforcement has got into it, and then correctional officers have got into it. And Facebook, I think, is one of the big platforms. There may be other platforms. I'll let her speak to that. But some of the things that the media, the mainstream media, report on is not digging down or drilling down to get to the heinous things that are being said and some things being perpetrated. And I know that in Texas, last time I checked on the media report said that there were 6 correctional officers under investigation, state and or federal. So, Roxy, I'm going to break this up into 3 parts. Tell, whatever you want to about yourself and the group, what you found out, and then I'll move on to section 2 when you're ready. You got the floor.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, we're actually, we're just a group of people. We've been around for quite some time, and we go places that other people dare not to go. And, check up on our government officials, whether, in, their business state or whether, on Facebook saying things about inmates. So our leader, Sammy, actually broke it to us. He infiltrated a group called Correctional Officer Life, and what he saw was dark and disturbing.
Correctional Officer Life.
Yes, sir.
And that's on what media platforms?
That would be on Facebook.
Okay, on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was really, really disturbing. There was correctional, and they're actually still posting about this stuff, and that's the most disturbing part of this whole thing. Now, the media is focusing a lot on the Feeling Cute challenge, and that's part of it. That is really part of it. One officer that just got fired for saying feeling cute might put your baby's daddy in the hole.
That means segregation without just cause, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. There's, you might shoot your baby's daddy, you might tase your girlfriend. It's an electrifying experience. But to get the real concept of this group and how they really feel would come from the admin himself. So the admin, Doug, he posted up something that his lieutenant had taught him years ago, and says that it's one of the best advices that he can give any CO, especially new ones. And it says, his lieutenant said, can an inmate ever be a decent person? And that's where everyone yells, never. Okay? And then it said, can an inmate ever be a decent inmate? And that's where everybody yells, maybe. This is their normal thinking process. That they can never be a decent person. That they were called pigs, they were called trash, they were called scumbags by these correctional officers. One actually went out on a ledge to call other people inmate lovers, like nurses, and how they have intimate moments together. Yeah, and call other, COs that don't agree with them an inmate lover. And this is actually a normal phrase used in that group. One officer says, the inmates may win a grievance once, but only once. It takes a sneak to be a good CO. Um, there's one CO, actually, she's a sergeant, Kimberly Williams, uh, actually told one of our members to go walk out blindfolded in traffic. There's COs in there talking about how they used to throw jugs of piss on inmates. There was one that we just found this morning that we're getting ready to deal with. That she's admitting that she saw a prison rape, peeked into the cell, and just walked away. I mean, these are the things that we're finding, and these are the things that the main media isn't focusing on at all. The most disturbing one that I think, I mean, this guy is just psychotic.
Yes, ma'am.
He talks about fantasizing about putting sarin gas in the sprinkler system and turning it on the inmate. And I quote, laughing your fucking ass off.
Well, now I know what sarin gas is, and obviously you do, and most of our viewers, I'm sure they do, but for the ones that don't, tell them what sarin gas is.
Well, sarin gas is very corrosive. That is what they use over in Palestine. Sarin gas is one of the most deadly chemicals out there. And to this officer, it was a joke. That's how he relieved his stress, by fantasizing about this.
Well, I got to put it to you like this, and I call things like I see them. And I worked in the correctional field in addition to my law enforcement as collateral duty or full time and doing law enforcement part time. And I did that probably for 5 years, 6 years out of my 40, to where I feel like I could say, yeah, I'm a correctional officer and a law enforcement officer. And oftentimes they have what they call dark humor, whatever field you work in, but especially like law enforcement corrections, they have a dark humor sometimes. Or sometimes it's a self-protection mechanism where they kind of wall themselves off. Sometimes they say off-color things to each other, and they know that it's a joke, and they see the humor in it when nobody else would. However, with that said, there are law enforcement officers and correctional officers that say things, and if they go to the extent to put it on social media, that's not a in-house discussion with other people that understand your mindset and understand what you have done or not done. But even the correctional officers, many times, they'll talk to each other about Officer so and so or Sergeant, Lieutenant, or Captain. They're a little nutso. If you got an inmate out of control, wait till so and so's on duty, and we'll fix his red wagon. And I used to ask, what do you mean? Oh, he's good with gas, or he's good with the taser. They build up a reputation. They say, wait till they're on duty, and we'll get them straight. Now, I've heard lots of stories. Now, I can't right off the top of my head right this minute think of anything that was extraneous. Now, one time I had to go down and get some shots because we had a really crazy inmate. When I say crazy, I don't mean like different levels. He was just totally deranged, and he would smear feces on the wall. He would pee in the floor, and we'd have to feed him what's called a loaf, where they fix up the vegetables and any meat, and they cook it into the bread. And so they give him a small cup of water, and they give him a loaf to eat. And about once a week, you have to extract these people, hopefully with no problem, but if it is, to actually sanitize and clean their room and force shower them under medical supervision. And he actually had something rigged up somehow that we couldn't see on a door trap, and because it had feces and stuff on it, was trying to feed him, and he got my hand caught in there, and it cut it pretty bad. So didn't require stitches, but I had to go get all these shots, and because they had to test him because I was contaminated for something like 6 months or a year, and I had to go every 3 months to make sure I didn't have HIV or any other bloodborne or pathogens. So bad things happen to officers, but we're trained and we know not to violate anybody's civil or constitutional rights.
Oh, absolutely. There's a, they crossed, there was a line that was crossed. There was, now I understand, and, like I've said to you before, I'm not anti-police.
Right.
I'm not anti-law enforcement. None of us are.
No.
But we are anti-corruption.
Absolutely.
And with this feel good challenge, I mean, like you said, some of it, is laughable. Some of it, not so much.
Right.
Some of it, and you have to understand something. That group was not just correctional officers. There were family members in there, wives in there, grandparents, their neighbors. So a lot of them actually were really angry that they called us all inmates. The inmates or ex-felons got into their room, but what they don't understand is they allowed us. They invited us in, kind of.
Right.
But it's not a state site, and that's what a lot of them don't understand. They're putting very specific information that breaks HIPAA. Very specific information, like taking pictures of the inmates. Some, I believe, were underage, and they're posting them up in this group for all of them to laugh at. And that's where it becomes a bit too much. And that's why I started calling you guys. It's the main media is not telling the whole story. They're not saying the comments. On those feel good challenges, they're not saying the comments that we also sent them. With the, one officer talked about, they've got a guy in segregation that keeps asking for medical forms and complaint forms, and they refuse to give it to him. And their excuse was, well, why should we? It's a waste of paper for him just to complain on us. It's that type of thing that's wrong. So many times, they called, or referred to inmates and their families as all these different types of names, and I mean it was pretty severe. And the thing that I kept telling everybody, so there's about 2.2 million people in the United States that are incarcerated currently.
Right.
About 40.4% is from like marijuana. Are those people, and now you got to remember, some of them are there for medical reasons, that because they smoke pot for medical reasons. Now, are they scumbags? Are they pigs because they smoked marijuana? I mean, there's so many things. There's some people, that they're posting about, or there's some officers from the jail, and they're posting about, the inmates from the jail. And it's like, how can you do this? How is this right? This is the reason why a lot of them are getting fired right now. Now, I haven't confirmed it, but one of our people said so far there's been 12 fires, 12 that have been fired, 2 that have resigned, and just numerous, dozens and dozens under investigation. And it's not just because of the feel good challenge, but it's still part of that.
Well, let me tell you, I take a really deep analytical thought on this, okay? When I worked in law enforcement, before I ever did anything in corrections of any substance other than just a little collateral duty, helping at bookend or something a day or two, or helping watch a cell block or a pod or whatever, till I really got in there in a more in-depth way. I didn't see it and didn't hear it, but other current or former law enforcement that went there they paid more money in their department or had better benefits, and they found themselves full-time or part-time there. They would say oftentimes, hey, there's some exceptional correctional officers in there that I wouldn't mind having out on the street to be my partner, but as a whole, This is a whole different breed of human beings that go in there. Now, to some extent, I say, well, you have to have an extraordinary person in general to deal with people, and they're in a roundabout way serving time with them from
Very
eight
true.
8 to 16 hours a day, anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week, and sometimes 6 days a week. And it's hard not to become institutionalized yourself. Now, with that said, they would say uh, they don't have the analytical skills to do what they do uh, like we do out on the streets, and they're trained different and they act different because they have immediate supervision over the top of them immediately or within 1 to 2 minutes. They got supervisors, they got cameras, and they got other things. Where if we're on the street, we might be there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or longer, and we make 85% of all of our decisions without any supervision, unless we call for it. Where they're where it's reversed with them, they get to make a few decisions, but they're micromanaged, and they don't have the skills, and so they don't look for those skills, but they should look for them to work independent, but they're not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where prison reform comes in. It needs to be done. It really does. And it's not just rules for the prisoners and COs. We need more. You need more COs. Because one of the biggest things that well, we need more COs and new better in laws because it's ridiculous that we house more, inmates than any other place in the country or in the world.
Right.
But
Well, here's something somebody pointed out to me one time. There was a guy that had like 5 bad chicks in a row that was in the state penitentiary. So he said, it's a paper crime. Said, there was victims, people on the other end didn't get their money, etc. But in the end, there was restitution. But the point is that on the third or fourth thing, it went up to some felony, and the judge said, based on the number of bad checks you've written, now we're going to have to send you to jail. And they went to jail for like 30 days or 6 months or whatever. And then the next go around, they were in the state penitentiary for 2 years or something. And this is somebody that actually had a job like as a top rated insurance salesman, but he couldn't manage his money. And his family was calling down there all the time. We're checking on him. We're checking on him. So that had a good effect and a bad effect. The good effect was they knew that he had an outside network, so they were more cautious with him. The reverse side is they got tired of hearing all these phone calls, and I think they basically hemmed him up and said, look, if your people keep calling down here, you're going to start having accidents. And I thought, wow, I wasn't there when it happened, so this was secondhand information, so there wasn't nothing I could testify to other than the grapevine. But I don't doubt it.
That happens.
But
that really happens. It really, really does happen. Things like that happen on a daily basis all throughout the country.
Right.
And it takes good COs to report these bad COs. And a lot of them, like what we noticed in the group, they weren't being reported. They knew it was wrong. After the story broke and everything, then some of these decent COs were like, that's what we were talking about. You shouldn't be posting that. You deserve to have your job lost. All you guys are talking about is illegal things, and it just goes on and on and on. They're being berated by their own, coworkers.
Right.
And because they know it's wrong.
But here was what the guy thought, and here's what his family thought. They said, well, if somebody murdered somebody, and you do them bad, threaten them, blah blah blah, it's okay because they're a real criminal and I'm not a real criminal. So the officers themselves and inmates also I find they have some kind of stepping system because, okay, if you sexually assaulted somebody, they deal with that one way and look at you one way. If you murdered somebody, they look at you another. If you're a career criminal, another. If you're a home burglar, if you're a bank robber, they kind of look at them in different things, and they have a tendency to treat them sometimes as a whole, and then sometimes they treat them on this step system. So it's a very bizarre culture in a prison. Things are said and done there that you, you would be hard to imagine if you wasn't there. And that's why a lot of inmates, uh, they would be hollering, cat in the hat, cat in the hat, because that was my nickname that they gave me because I was still wearing the old straw hats, which I thought looked nice and made my uniform complete because I'm from the old school, but most of them were baseball caps. And they'd say baseball players, baseball players. So they'd know the young cats with baseball caps were coming. But me, that was my specific name. And when that would happen, I'd have inmates talking to me all the way down. What dorm you on, Jones? What dorm you on? They're trying to find out if I was going to them or not, because I had a reputation that the what the state called creature comfort, toothpaste, toilet paper, toothbrush, energy kits, whatever. I made sure they got them. They got them on time. There wasn't no holdup on their mail. I went by every rule and regulation straight up and down. Now, I was very hard on inmates, but they didn't care if I was hard on them, so long as I was fair. And
Exactly.
so they said, Mr. Jones, we don't care if you hang us up on a nail on the wall, so long as you do it the right way. That was just a way of saying, hey, we don't care how hard you are. But I said, look, the harder I am, the more fair I am, and the more I'll allow things. And when there was good behavior, I rewarded good behavior with a good write up, points, whatever the system was. I would recognize them. When they did bad things, I'd say, well, here's the consequences. And first go around would be I'd go easier, then I'd escalate up to the full penalty. So I had a reputation for being fair and honest. So, in fact, I got to tell you this one real quick story. There was an inmate that knew me from out on the streets for years, and he had killed a man, and he was probably looking at 9 to 15 years in prison at the time. But he turned himself in. I talked to him and his aunt, and he turned himself into me, and he worked with me on the case, and I talked to the state, and I don't remember if we got him 5 years or 6 years, but we definitely got 1 to 2 and up to 7 years off his sentence. And we let him do some things, for lack of a better word, that would be probably considered a privilege, to make some extra phone calls and take care of some of his personal business because he was very cooperative. I mean, he killed the man and he claimed self-defense, but the evidence really showed otherwise. But the point is that he was in this prison. I didn't know where he was at, and I went in and people was trying me really hard. Oh, new cock, new rooster on the yard, and all these things. Here comes some fresh fish, and they was messing with me. I said, well, I can tell you what I'm going to do, or I can show you, and I can show you faster than I can tell you. I ain't going to do you wrong, but I'm going to use the system correctly. And so this guy come in, he saw me, said, Mr. Jones, and this guy had a reputation. I said, yeah, how you doing? He told them guys, hey, I know him from out on the streets. He's straight. And they said, they said he was new. Oh, he's new here, but he ain't new. He got over 30 years in when I walked in the gate there, and they said, you don't want to mess with that cat. He goes by the rules, but he knows them backwards and forwards. And you're going to wind up not getting no mail for a long time and no visits because he's going to use the system. He ain't going to lay no hands on you. He ain't going to get nobody to lay hands on you, but he knows how to bring you into check. but he's a good guy and he'll reward you if you do right. That's the cat that helped me out on my sentence. So that straightened out everything for me right there on the spot. Word travels.
Oh, absolutely. It's not hard to be fair. It
Right,
really isn't. To do those little things that these prisoners need, it's not very hard.
right.
And yes, some of them have some really bad stuff, murdering and raping and other
Yes,
things that people put out there. But there's a lot that are not violent. There's no victim attached, and they're just there to serve their time. And they're in these vulnerable positions. And what some of these guards, and I can't, like I said, I can't say all of them because they're really good ones.
right.
Some of them are just taking advantage of people in vulnerable positions because they can, and that's
Right.
what their normal is. You know, years ago it was a lot worse. There was even less other good COs coming out and saying what these guys are doing
Right.
because there was even less you know checks and balances. There was nothing back then. Well,
Correct.
there was, but to a certain degree. But now, it's coming out more and more. And all of these correctional officers with these old mindsets, they're being put in check. And it takes every individual, normal or not, to go out and help put them in check. And I mean that for every government facet. It
Right.
takes us. It takes one person to make a phone call. It takes 3 minutes to make that phone call, to express what you feel and let them know because they don't know. There is a huge disconnect when it comes to correctional officers and police and so forth. But there's a huge disconnect. Um, we're not being told. It is like a secret society because the media is not picking these stories up. They're not letting these things out. Who's going to believe inmates? Inmates have been complaining about the exact same stuff that they were posting up, happening to them, and nothing was done, or they were punished for speaking up. I know a couple prisoners, former and right now, that has happened to. They spoke up, or they just took a few minutes. They were able to write a thing if they were allowed to have it, and they spoke up. And the end game of that is they were put in seg, or they were put in medical, or things of that nature. There's actually one particular officer, Officer Brooks. I won't give her first name. That actually gives a very detailed and very specific how-to guide on taking revenge against inmates and getting away with it. I mean, this is how bad that group was, and this kind of thing, that's what no one is talking about.
Well, let me tell you, as you and I talked beforehand, what I would
Mm-hmm.
call a interview before the interview to to discuss possible topics for this interview, and to make it as entertaining and as informative. And when I say entertaining, that a lot of times people find news or the hidden news very entertaining and enlightening to them, not entertaining as in talking about bad things. But the psychologists tell us that the reason people rubberneck at an accident is because psychologically they're saying, I'm glad that's not me. Uh, so people do things for a lot of psychological reasons that they don't realize sometimes. But I, I'm I'm saying that when we talked, you had told me, various stories, and that you've been in this a decade and a half, and that you're not what some people call a troll, but some people refer to you as a troll. But that's not the average ordinary day citizen like me or the next person. These are government officials that have sworn an oath of office, and they're out there on the taxpayer dollar, and they're abusing people, and you try and make contact and you try and get them to correct it and fix it, and when they don't, then you just make a local or national exposure to bring it, to the forefront, because the people, the good people, that are usually the silent majority, at some point they're outraged to the point that they are no longer silent and they step up to the plate and say, hey, we got to do something. That happened in the 60s and 70s in prison reform, and I think we're fixing to go through another round of that in the near future, in my opinion. Now, things from when I went in the 70s I saw, and things as late as 2008, 2009, maybe 2010 that I would see on a regular basis had changed by 100%, but it's still got another 100 to go. And when I say that, most of the time, most of the inmates and most of the officers are what I would call within variance. Okay. But, 10 to 20% of the officers, 10 to 20% of the inmates, they always seem to be the bad apple in the barrel. And the other officers don't know how that's going to affect them. Other inmates don't do, and it causes safety issues. And when men or women are locked down, as in whether they're in a cell, which that's even worse, but when they're locked down for hours and hours and left to their own schemes, the things that officers come up with and things that inmates come up with in close quarters for hours would stagger the mind. I have seen inmates turn radios, and I don't know, of course, this isn't probably these modern radios, but in years back, some of the more, the bigger radios, they somehow could set it up into a minor telegraph or minor transmitter versus receiver. And very, very clever and cunning some of the inmates are, but so are the officers. And until I think it's 1975 in Florida, they hired ex-felons, inmates, to be guards in Florida. And one of them was a lieutenant who used to be a highway patrolman, and he was my supervisor. Uh, and he was a convicted felon. Okay, and he was out there carrying guns. You say, well, his firearm's disabled. Well, they made some exception to the rule for him and others through ATF, through the prison guard system. Now, unless you was in there in 75 or before, you wasn't. But that was a normal thing that happened down in the South, at least. Uh, and so you had ex-inmates running new inmates. And you had a lot of problems with that, because inmates would say, well, you did time in the joint, and you ain't gonna tell me what to do. You ain't no better than me. And they get into some serious conflicts. Well, those days of that are almost gone. I mean, there may be 5 or 6% left in the system, but they're fast fading away the last 5 or so years from what I hear. And I ain't saying I'm not an inmate lover. I am for accountability for officers and inmates on both sides. And that's not there, and I don't know that it'll ever be 100%. I doubt it, but it should be humane, and it should be checked in real time. And I'm not saying, oh, if these people went out and committed these hard crimes and the jury of their peers convict them and they went to jail, that they should be treated like they're at a 5-star hotel. By no means. But the judgment is to be locked away from society, not to be beaten, mistreated while you're there to rehab, relearn how to be a productive member of society.
Exactly. They don't need, when they go into these facilities, they're doing their time. They've made a mistake. The judge has said, look, you've made a mistake. You just got to do it. But they don't need extra abuse. They don't need extra punishment.
Right.
If they do something wrong, actually credibly do something wrong,
Right.
that's one thing. While they're inside, that's one thing.
Right.
But a lot of these prisoners and a lot of these inmates, they're not doing anything wrong. Well, I mean, to the degree that you would want to shoot them or rape them or beat them or throw
Right.
piss on them. It's just absolutely inhumane, the things that they were talking about, and absolutely illegal on a federal level.
Yes.
A lot of these things, and this is the issue. This is their norm. It's their normality. This is normal for them.
Right.
For
Well,
the system, that's just how things have worked for years, and it's got to change, man. It's got to change.
Well, places I worked, the older guys and people that had been there a couple times or three, they would say, "Hey, don't call me inmate. Inmates are crazy. We're convicts, and we're here doing. We did the crime. We're here doing our time. We're going to do it straight. We're going to do it right." Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So they would consider themselves a convict. Everybody else was inmates. So those that were young and running wild and crazy was inmates. The ones that were settled and doing their time were convicts. But they would say the reason that they would tell me when there was going to be a problem is because I did everything by the book. I was fair, firm, and consistent, which is what we were taught. They said, look, if you're a butthole on Monday, when you show up at work on your very first day, you got to be a butthole on Friday. So that don't mean break no rules, but if you got a real stern attitude, you got to keep it. You can't change because inmates have to have fair, firm, and consistent. And you get that through your policies, procedures, and rule books, so long as they don't violate the law. So we understood that. And inmates would, I've actually had some inmates that I think were really ticked off at me because they didn't get their way, not because they didn't do nothing right, and they was going to do something to me. Well, other inmates would say, there might be some problems around here. Why? Well, so and so's been doing you wrong and talking about setting you up and said we got to have an attitude adjustment on that cat. I say no, now don't do that. Of course, I tell them that, but they do it anyway. And then somebody come around with their hat in their hand and say, "Mr. Jones, I'm sorry," and they looked a little roughed up. And I said, "What happened to you?" They said, "Fell down."
Yeah.
How many times did you fall down? I mean, are you a fall risk? What's going on? Well, Mr. Jones, this is real life. You know how it is. And I disrespected you, and the fellas put me in check. Okay, so can we just leave it at that? Okay, if that's where you want to leave it, and ain't nobody talking, I can't do nothing about it. Okay, I said justice really works strange sometimes because they were going to hurt me. Then because I did inmates right, I had over 90% of them on my side. And if I needed information, I got it, and I feel like I did the inmates right, their families right. I did right by their victims because they had victims they left in their wake. And so, so I was trying to be fair all the way around. People can say what they want to about me, and they will.
Yeah.
But at nighttime, I can lay my head on my pillow. Now, convicts will tell you, don't mess around and get the okey doke. Well, I had to figure out what that was. That would be like a sergeant would come in and we were going to do a shakedown, and somebody had pissed the wrong officer off, and they would say, "Hey, tell Brown down there, don't search his room. Tell him I need to talk to him." So that's signaling to the other inmates he's a snitch, and he wasn't. But that's telling them, "Oh, it's going to be a blanket party for Brown tonight, or Jacobs, or Smith, or whomever." Because they didn't shake down the rooms, or they wouldn't even call out sometimes. They'd say, "Hey, just pass this room. What about the other ones? Get them all." And they'd say it where 3 or 4 hardcore inmates would hear, and it was trouble, and somebody usually would wind up going to the hospital. And that's the way some of them did. And, of course, if officers like me spoke up and said something about it, and we did, then somewhere up the line, a lieutenant, a captain, a major would call that sergeant in. or that officer in and say what happened. They said, well, I needed to talk to them. And if I shook down their room and pissed them off, then they wouldn't give me the information I needed. They said, well, they got hurt because so and so. And he said, well, that wasn't my intention. So they got a way to talk themselves out of trouble a lot of times. They're schooled in what to do.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what you just hit on. What actually Officer Brooke, her first line is, it says almost, what you just said. There are other ways to deal with inmates who push your buttons. For example, you do a shakedown in everyone's area except his. This will piss off other inmates, and they will deal with him, especially if you found something. That's the mindset of some of these officers or some of these correctional officers. I can't say they're officers. They've got too many feelings out there, thinking they're law enforcement. I got to remind them.
Yeah, they're not law enforcement. They in some states are classified law enforcement for purposes of carrying guns on duty or for purposes of HR 218 retired and they can carry guns, the same as law enforcement, or for retaking somebody into custody that's in the penal institution with or without a warrant. And, very, very, very super limited. But their scope and authority is really a whole different set of disciplines. I got trained, which in Florida you could cross train, but I actually went through the entire police academy and I actually went through the entire correctional academy. And then I'd see people that was cross trained and I saw the training they did get and didn't get. Now, to me, that's what they call minimum standards. They're not going to give you no more. It's up to you to figure out from that point, it's your career. What can you do? What should you do to be the best that you can be and maybe move up the chain and move up the right way, not by hooking people up and making a name for yourself, But I guess we skipped right over into section 1 and 2 all at once. So the final thing is I'm gonna let it close out two ways. One, you tell anything you'd like about your association, how it come together, what part do you play, and finish it out with how, if somebody hears this and they say, hey, I want to talk to Roxy or I want to interview her or how can we help and what would be the best way to help? You just speak whatever's on your mind, and when you're done, just tell me you're done.
All right. Well, I'm not going to tell you my group's name because everybody looks at me funny when I do. I'll give you the initials. It's THF, and we're considered a dream team, I guess you could say. We were handpicked by the two co-founders from activists all throughout the United States. He found us through his travels, activism and all kinds of things, advocates, and everything. What you could do? You do what the government's been telling you to do. If you see something, you say something. If you see something that's wrong, and morally that that shouldn't happen, that isn't right. Don't turn your back and wait for somebody else to pick up the thing. You do it yourself. Call. Make a phone call. That's all you need to do. Make a post. It's really simple to create change. And that's what everybody needs to remember. Change is very easy. As long as you have the guts to do it. Take that 3 minutes, take that 5 minutes. If you see something in a newspaper, if you see something on Facebook, if you see something on YouTube and it doesn't feel right, trust yourself. Know that it's not right. Start calling.
Of course.
Call those places. Call city managers, city halls, governors. That's what we did. Go to Twitter, everywhere. Anywhere and everywhere you could post, that's what you need to do.
Well, let me offer this. If somebody sees this and they say, hey, I got a question for Roxy. Put it in the comments, and
Oh,
and she can come in and answer for herself. But if a day or so goes by and she hasn't answered it, I will do my best to get up with her and say, hey, there's 3 or 4 questions in the comments, and I will try and respond that way. If she hasn't, in other words, she's a lady of many different hats, and
oh, yeah.
she helps the organization. Uh, the things she told me or in confidence, like I promised people, and I've
Oh,
never deviated. I know how to contact her. I know who she is. I understand all the connections, but that's for me to know, and I'll be the conduit to get the information to you. Unless to when and if she chooses to be on Good Morning America or Fox News or CNN or someplace like that and say, hey, it's me, Roxy, gas mask Roxy, you know.
yeah. I highly doubt they're going to allow me to rock my gas mask on CNN or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Right now, we're doing phone interviews only.
right, but I can contact her and stuff. Now, my final question: if somebody writes in there that they have a family member or friend in jail or prison that is allegedly being abused by government officials, and they reach out to you, then um, I guess I should just bring that to your attention and let you deal with them on a
Oh,
private basis.
absolutely.
Okay.
If people have information for us, absolutely, we'll step up and do something about it. That's not a problem. That's
Okay.
what we do. That's what we're about.
Okay. Now, I know this has what I'm fixing to say nothing to do with you. I'm having to look this up and make sure I don't get myself mixed up here. Uh, I'm looking up something here for just a second that I promised I would get out there. I don't know if you know about the auditors over in Leon Valley, but
Oh yeah, I've been watching those guys.
right. Well, there was a 2.0 Ohio Guardian or Ohio Audits or whatever he was. Anyway, the word is that he snitched and ratted out a bunch of people. Now, I'm not calling him a snitch and I'm not calling him a rat. This is what's been reported by others, okay? But at any rate, there's another man called News Now Ohio. He's a good guy and a good auditor, but people have mistaken News Now Ohio for Ohio Guardian 2.0 or whatever he called himself. Well, this man, uh, being mistaken for him, has been getting viable threats of violence up to homicide against him and his family. And so he does 2 things. One, he reports it to the authorities. Number two, he lets them know, hey, that's not me. Okay. Uh, he ain't trying to like give them the address of the other guy and help them along or nothing, but he is letting people know. And he said, would you please, because you know that I'm News Now Ohio and I'm not that other cat. And would you please let people know so maybe they'll stop threatening me and my family? He said, I don't wish no harm on the other guy, but you know, if their beef is with him, it ain't with me. I don't want to get accidentally murdered, you know, for being mistaken. So I thank you for holding on here and sticking with me. And I guess I'm fixing to wrap it up. Is there anything else you want to say that's crossed your mind?
No, I just thank you so much for giving us time and space to get out the rest of the story.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
you know, some of us we've been watching you First Amendment auditors.
Yes.
Like Eric's my boy. That's my homie right there.
Yes. Well, everybody has a different style. And I get a lot of emails from people because I guess many people consider me the most approachable for whatever their reason is. But they either call me, text me, email me, and they're always asking me, well, can you tell this one, do more of this, less of that, talk this way, and I try and tell them, listen, I'm not their mama or their daddy. I can't make them do anything or not do anything. I can tell them what you would like and who you are and what your suggestions are, but that's all I can do. Everybody's got their own style and their own way, and they're just like if you go over here to the Wall Street Journal, their reporters are kind of one way. At the New York Post, they're another. At the Dallas Morning News, they're another. LA Times, they're another. They're different people covering different stories in their own way. And you're actually asking me to ask them to do something like change the color of their eyes, but that's just who they are. And like them or not, that's who they are. That's how they do. And none of the auditors have been ugly, but they said, listen, if they want to watch me, I'm like a TV channel. You turn there, and there I am. If you don't, turn to another channel. If you like part of what I say, listen to the part I don't. And when you get to where you don't, then turn it off, go somewhere else. And there ain't being ugly, and I'm not being ugly, but I got the same feeling. If you like it, come on over. If you're coming over here just to put hate filled, what you call First Amendment, where you're dogging me personally, you're dogging my family or these other auditors or their families dogging us just because you're hate-filled people, I'm going to delete it. And I got a death threat last night, and that's been forwarded. So, you know, on one hand, I take them with a grain of salt. On the other hand, I've seen people just halfway kind of hinted, and people wind up in serious condition. So I just treat them all as though they're very viable and a real threat, and I go from there. But thank you so much. And if there is a good showing and a lot of interest in this, or people would say, hey, Chief, bring her back on, could you be available again?
Oh, sure, absolutely. That's not a problem. And I think I didn't answer you earlier. If people have questions,
Yes.
that no problem. Bring them to me, and I have no problem, replying and everything.
Y'all heard her say it. Okay. Well, God bless you all. Have a super great day and come back and see us next time. Thank you for everything, and everything will be down in the links below. Bye bye. Goodbye, y'all.